All right, so we are going to begin the next unit, starting with vitamins, minerals, and it's going to be that second half of the nutritional label that I showed you during the last lecture last week. Yeah, I think that's all I have for announcements. There's nothing new. All right, so vitamins are defined as organic molecules that are necessary for our function. However, unlike the biomolecules that I went over last week, biomolecules you actually need in a fairly high quantity. You need a large intake of those biomolecules in order to do all of the jobs. For example, proteins. You need proteins to get a large amount of amino acids so that you can create your own proteins to do all of the work that your cells need to do. Vitamins are necessary. They're still required, but you need them in smaller amounts. So you do not need to be consuming vast quantities of each particular vitamin in order to remain healthy. Vitamins are typically going to be just categories of molecules, so they're not super specific things. So each one of these is a category of a particular organization of molecular pieces that are going to do some function for the body. And then just like those biomolecules that we talked about last week, some of these can be made by the body. So we qualify these as non-essential, and some cannot, so those are essential. Again, remembering that difference, we still need all of them. We need them to function, but some you can make and some you cannot, and that's how we categorize essential versus non-essential. So unlike the biomolecules that we talked about, where we would consume them, they get broken down or metabolized, and then we use those pieces for some other function, vitamins don't work that way. When we consume vitamins, they remain whole, and then those are going to do something else to assist in other processes. So they remain whole, we're not breaking them down into their constituents and using those pieces. Just like many other biomolecules, solubility plays a factor in our absorption of vitamins. Vitamins fall into one of two categories. Either they are water soluble because they are hydrophilic, or they are fat soluble because they are hydrophobic. So you do need to know which categories they fall into. So that's this figure right here. I always just remember that B and C are the water soluble ones, and then everything else is fat soluble. So if you just remember those two, then the rest fall into place. There is a difference in their functions. So the water soluble vitamins are going to stay in the body for less time. That makes sense. Most of our body is water. So if we are dissolving these vitamins quickly, we're going to pass them much more quickly. It can be removed from our bloodstream and put into the urine and expelled or sent out in sweat and all these other water uses that we have for the body. So they go through much more quickly, which means you need to have a more constant supply of water soluble vitamins. These need to be consumed much more regularly so that you make sure words on Wednesday, that you maintain the required level you need. Fat soluble are going to be retained much longer, not indefinitely. They do get passed, but they have a longer time within the body, usually several days to a week or two, depending on the type of vitamin. These are typically going to be passed through the liver, and the liver holds on to them until they are needed, or they simply pass the course. So, like I said, make sure you know which categories they fall into and then the basic differences between them. So what do vitamins actually do for us? Again, like I said, they're not being broken down into constituents. They have a particular role, and that is as coenzymes. We haven't really talked about enzymes. We're going to get to that on Friday's lecture. Enzymes are particular proteins that work as catalysts. They help certain processes function faster. They facilitate the function of different processes. Coenzymes, the vitamins, are required by specific enzymes in order to do that job. So some enzymes can just happen. They go and do their catalyst and they function. Some require the presence of a specific coenzyme. So that coenzyme comes in, docks with the enzyme, and then the enzyme can go and do its job. So they're just an extra piece of the puzzle. All right, so now we know a little bit about vitamins. Now it's the Great Vitamin Survey. We're going to talk about all of them. I'm going to give you the basics, things like their names, their uses. I've already gone over the solubility, and then the sources for each of these vitamins. So make sure these are the things that I want you to know for each of them. I will say a few extra things here and there, and those might be on the weekly quiz. But as far as this big list that I'm about to throw at you, those are the key takeaways. I did try to spice it up a little bit with deficiencies, but it's just a list of vitamins, so we'll see how this goes. Vitamin A. Vitamin A is used to form rhodopsin. You may recognize this. I talked about it in A&P2 when I talked about sight. Rhodopsin is a specific pigment that's used in the eye for low light, so being able to pick up light in very low light conditions, as well as assisting in color vision. So it's required for these functions of your eye. It is also used to stimulate epithelial cell growth, although that is less of a function of it. Mostly it's going to be used for rhodopsin. We can get vitamin A from animal products, especially liver. Turns out the liver is a great place to get a lot of different vitamins. So if you can enjoy eating liver, it's a good source. I'm not a fan, but you can eat it. And then many different types of vegetables, especially the yellow and orange ones. It's actually the high concentration of, it's like beta carotene or something, that is a precursor to vitamin A that makes these vegetables yellow and orange. So if you see a yellow or orange vegetable, that's a great source of vitamin A. That's why carrots are the classic example. You may have seen as a child, I don't know if I got this because I was a child of the 90s, but lots of propaganda about eat your carrots or you're gonna go blind. Yeah, it's because carrots are a great source of vitamin A, and vitamin A is specifically linked to eyesight. So this is actually a problem, a deficiency in vitamin A in a lot of developing countries. And so vitamin A deficiency is pretty well studied because of that. An early sign is night blindness. That makes sense. If vitamin A is specifically linked to the perception in low light conditions, you're going to start getting night blindness as a result of lack of vitamin A. In severe cases, this is going to lead to permanent retina and cornea damage in the eye, which can then lead to permanent blindness. And based on the WHO website, 250,000 to 500,000 children every year go permanently blind due to a lack of vitamin A in their diets. It can also lead to increased risks of respiratory and diarrheal infections. That has to do with that epithelial production. If we're limiting the growth of epithelial cells, you're going to damage those tissues, and they're going to be more prone to those infections over time. If I go too fast, let me know. I just know that this is just a list, so I'm going to keep moving. Vitamin B is not actually one vitamin. It's a group of vitamins, and they all have their own names, their own uses, their own sources, and they each get their own number. So you can see in this picture here, B1, B2, so on and so forth. So I'm going to break these down and go through each of them. There are 8 B vitamins. You will notice, though, that they skip some numbers. So we go 1, 2, 3, and then there's 5, 6, 7, 9, and 12. It's because through time we've recognized that we misidentified certain molecules and they don't actually belong to the vitamin B group. And so they have been given different names. We don't use them anymore. And rather than just renaming them, they simply kept with the original numbering system. So there is no B8. That one's just been removed. So here's the list just as a summary slide for you. The name, the number, and the main use for them. I'm not going to go through this because I'm going to go through them individually, but it's a nice little summary for you. Vitamin B1 is called thiamine, and this one is going to aid in the metabolism of carbohydrates, one of those specific biomolecules that I talked about last week. So we're going to get thiamine from whole grains, beans and seeds and fruits. Beans, seeds, nuts, that's going to be a pretty common one. You're going to see that pop up multiple times. Those are great sources for a lot of different vitamins. I'm not going to tell you the specific nuts or the specific seeds. If you're really interested, you can get into that, but not every seed is going to be a great source of every single vitamin. And then whole grains, this is something that comes up a lot, is actually important because, especially in modern culture, we eat a lot of processed grains, and the production of processing those grains actually removes the part of those grains that contains these vitamins. So things like white flour, we make it white by removing the vitamin structure. It's not originally white, it has a bran layer that would make it more of a brown color. We remove that, we take out the vitamins. So if you are living in a country eating mostly processed grains, you can actually have a lack of certain vitamins in your diet that would otherwise be there if you were eating it in unprocessed ways. So whole grains are very important. So thiamine deficiencies, loss of appetite. There are some studies that are indicating that thiamine actually plays a role in hunger cues. So if you have a lack of thiamine, your hunger cues are not going to function. You're not going to feel hunger, so you're not going to eat as much, which are then going to lead to other associated issues like fatigue, irritability, things like that. Prolonged deficiency can also lead to nerve damage. So you can feel things like tingling sensations. Your senses may not function properly, so you'll have blurry vision, smell, taste, all of those things start to function irregularly. And these types, especially this fatigue, irritability, that sort of thing, those are going to be very common for most of these as far as deficiency symptoms go. So I'm not going to go through deficiency for every single one of these, especially if it's not a common deficiency. But you can kind of attach these general symptoms to all of them. Vitamin B2 is riboflavin. This one is required for aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is going to be a lecture next week, but aerobic respiration is how your cells make energy. How they make a specific molecule called ATP. That ATP is then used by other cells to do work. It is a necessary, essential function for your body. And so we need to make sure that we maintain decent levels of vitamin B2 to make sure that aerobic respiration can function properly. It's going to be found in dairy, eggs, beans, almonds, lean meats. Whenever I say eggs, just as a side note, I specifically mean the yolk. There's very little nutritive value in the white of the egg. So if you're looking to eat eggs as a source of vitamins, you need to eat the yolks. Just like the other vitamin B, we lose a lot of this in the grain processing. So whenever we're going to process that, take away the bran, you're losing the vitamin source. Because this is commonly found in dairy, eggs, and meats, this is something that can be seen as a deficiency in vegans, people who are practicing a non-animal diet. So you have to make sure, if you're following a vegan diet, that you find other sources of vitamin B. Again, beans and almonds are good sources as long as they're not the almonds that have been removed, or you can buy the ones that don't have that brown layer. That brown layer is the vitamins. So if you are eating almonds thinking this is how you're getting your B2, you have to make sure you get the ones that still have that layer on there. Again, deficiencies, if you're following that kind of diet, dry and cracking skin is very common, hair loss, and just like before, degeneration of the nervous system, similar symptoms. You can also see some decay of the liver tissue as well. Vitamin B3 is niacin. This is also needed for aerobic respiration, so another one that is absolutely essential for the production of energy by your body. This one is found in beans, but more commonly in seafood and a lot of meats, and then you can also get it from yeast. Deficiency in vitamin B3 is not very common. except in cases where we have extreme famine. So if you're actually in a period of starvation, then we start to see a lack of B3, although that's not necessarily your most pressing concern. It's also seen in certain communities that their diet is overly reliant on corn. Corn is a grain. It's good for other vitamins that you need, but it's a particular grain that is very deficient in this specific vitamin B3. So if you're relying heavily on corn in your diet, you need to find other sources of this vitamin. This is another one that vegetarians should be mindful of, again, because meats and seafoods are a common source. B5, pantothenic acid. This is going to be used in the citric acid cycle, which is phase 2 of aerobic respiration. So again, we'll get to this in another lecture, but you'll see why it's important. And also in the synthesis of biomolecules, found in dairy, eggs, whole grains, meats, beans. This is a deficiency that is extremely uncommon. Because it's found in a very wide variety of food sources, most people can get what they need, because we only need small quantities, just through regular diet. And like I said, I'm not going to go through deficiency symptoms if it's a very uncommon deficiency, so we'll just move on. Vitamin B6, pyridoxine. This is used for the synthesis of amino acids. You may recall that our proteins are amino acids that are strung together, and our proteins do everything for the function of the body. So this is another very important one because we need the amino acids to be created to create the proteins to go do the work for our body. Also in the production of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is, of course, the molecule that transports oxygen and carbon dioxide in our bloodstream. This one is going to be found in pork and poultry, also beans and a lot of dairy. Again, a deficiency in this particular vitamin is not common. Most people are able to get it in their diets. Vitamin B7, biotin. This one is used in synthesizing of specific biomolecules. This one is produced by your gut bacteria, so you don't actually really need to consume this one. This is one of those non-essential. And because we produce it on our own, deficiency is uncommon. Makes sense. So as long as your gut flora remain healthy, you're not killing that off on a regular basis, you can provide yourself with the vitamin B7 that you need. Vitamin B9, folate, used in the synthesis of nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are going to be used, of course, for DNA production and DNA repair, so that's going to be very necessary. And as well as red blood cell production, so replenishing those red blood cells. Remember, red blood cells have a very short lifespan, so this is an essential vitamin in the replacement of your red blood cells. The nucleic acid plays a role in, as I said, making DNA, so during DNA synthesis, as well as repairing damaged DNA. This can be found in grains, beans, leafy vegetables, liver, again. Deficiencies are going to affect red blood cell production. That's the big one. Again, red blood cells don't live very long, so making sure you have enough folate is important. This is common in vegetable poor diets. So if you're someone who eats a very strong carnivore diet, this is kind of the opposite of what we typically see, you're going to have a lack of B9 or folate. So because it has a key role in the production of red blood cells, we're going to see anemia as a common symptom of this deficiency. Again, fatigue, sores, growth problems, and nerve damage. That has to do with that nucleic acid production. If you can't repair tissues, you can't repair that DNA, you're going to have problems with creating the proteins that you need to function. And so you're going to see issues with wound healing, nerve damage, so all of your sensation, and growth. Vitamin B12, cobalamin. This one is also needed for red blood cells. It's also used for the production of myelin. That's a throwback to ANP1. Myelin is that coating we see on nerves, and it's there to insulate the nerves, make sure those action potentials generate along the entire nerve, makes them move faster. So we need vitamin B12 to maintain our myelin. This is common in meat, dairies, and seafoods, and is very uncommon in plants. So this is another one that vegetarians need to be very mindful of, because you're not necessarily getting this from a plant-based diet. This is something that is often taken as a supplement. Another interesting fact about this particular vitamin, as you age, your absorption of B12 actually goes down. So you're not able to process it as efficiently as you do when you're younger. So as you get older, excuse me, you're more at risk for developing a deficiency in B12. So it may be something that you need to adjust your diet for, or again, taking supplements to make sure you're getting the amount of B12 you need. Again, associated with red blood cell production, so anemia is going to be a common symptom. And again, because it's associated with the production of myelin, which is that coating for your nerves, this one has very strong neurological side effects. So we're going to see headaches are a common first symptom, paresthesia, where you're feeling like a tingling sensation in your limbs, as well as impaired coordination. I don't know if any of you have seen, this was, again, standard viewing in my high school years, the movie called Lorenzo's Oil. No? All right. So Lorenzo's Oil is a movie that was made about, true life story kind of thing. A child was born that had a lot of these symptoms. It turns out he had a specific genetic disorder that prevented the production of myelin. And this was one of the attempted treatments, was giving him excess B12 supplement in order to attempt to create the myelin he needed. There were other solutions that eventually worked out, but these are the types of side effects that you saw throughout the movie as they were trying to figure out what was wrong with this little boy. All right, so that was B12. Like I said, whirlwind tour. Make sure to note that these are very common sources of most of those vitamins: beans, seeds, nuts, whole grains. But again, it's very important to recognize that, especially in modern US society, we process a lot of these things, removing that outer layer. So if we look at our whole grain here, it has this bran, this outer edge. When you process it, they polish the grain, and that removes the bran layer. That's what makes it white in color. That's why we have white flour, white rice, all of these things. We're removing that outer edge, but it's the outer edge that has that source of vitamins. All right, so because vitamin B is big, I'm just kind of simplifying it for you. Make sure you know the number and the name. Each of those had a specific name associated with it, so I do want you to know both. And then the common sources and functions for the ones that are common deficiencies. So the ones that are not common deficiencies, I'm not as concerned about those. I want you to focus on the ones that do have deficiencies, or ones that deficiencies are seen more commonly, I should say. All right, vitamin C. Vitamin C is called ascorbic acid. There's a common misconception. People think it's citric acid because vitamin C, you think of citric fruits or citrus fruits in order to get citric acid, in order to get vitamin C. But it's not citric acid, that's something else entirely. Vitamin C is ascorbic acid. It is going to be used in collagen synthesis, so things like wound healing, production of new tissues. It's also an antioxidant. An antioxidant is just a material that is going to prevent oxygen from attacking our tissues. I've talked about it before that oxygen is extremely reactive. It oxidizes things. That's why we call it oxidation. So rusting or your fruit decaying on the counter, that's oxidation. And it's happening to our own tissues from the oxygen in our body. The presence of vitamin C helps to alleviate that. It actually causes the oxygen to attach to and fight the vitamin C before it will attack our own tissues. So antioxidants are important. It is found in a lot of citrus fruits. That's again why we have that misconception that it's a citric acid, as well as certain vegetables. This is a vitamin that is very rare in animal sources. So someone who is again eating a very high meat diet may be lacking in vitamin C. This one has an interesting deficiency just because, I like weird diseases. Scurvy is the classic disease associated with a vitamin C deficiency, and it comes from the inability to create and repair collagen. So collagen is again a part of your tissue. It's a connective tissue. It's used in wound healing. So that's going to mean you're going to see easy bruising, a lot of extensive large bruises that don't heal very quickly. Gum deterioration, a very common ailment would be bleeding gums. That's one of the first big signs, as well as lethargy. This was a very common ailment of sailors kind of throughout the age of seafaring, but especially during the 18th century. I was looking into it and found this pretty cool document. This is a note, or a page taken from a medical sailor, his notebook. So he was there mostly as an observationist, and so he took notes of the conditions seen in his crew as they were developing scurvy. So you can see extensive bruising, we're seeing the production of very thick, heavy veins, and so on. Not nearly as common now because we know that vitamin C is tagged or associated with scurvy, so we make sure that you have enough of that on a seafaring voyage. Vitamin D facilitates calcium uptake. By the way, vitamin D doesn't actually have another name. It's just vitamin D. Facilitates calcium uptake by the digestive tract. So you can eat a bunch of calcium. That's great. You need vitamin D in order for your body to absorb that calcium. So calcium is going to be a mineral that's necessary. We'll get to that one in a little bit. But in order to make sure that your body can absorb it, you also need to have vitamin D. And because we're absorbing calcium, we have a job for it, the calcium maintenance in bones. So again, calcium's super important. In order to put the calcium in your bones, you need vitamin D. So they work together. These two really are a joint unit. Vitamin D is one that you can actually produce on your own. However, it requires sun exposure. So that's why you think of vitamin D as something you need to get from the sun. You're not actually getting vitamin D from the sun. The sun is facilitating the chemical reaction that creates vitamin D in your body. So it can be produced by ourselves as long as you are getting sufficient sun exposure. So this is also a common deficiency in people who do not go outside very often. Other dietary sources would be fish, eggs, and you can have foods that are enriched in vitamin D. This is actually pretty common. Cereals, commercially bought milk have vitamin D added to them so that they are a dietary source of vitamin D. Some deficiency symptoms. These make sense. Loss of bone density, if it's going to be directly correlated to the intake of calcium and the deposition of calcium in your bones, you're going to see a loss of bone density. Delayed growth, so if this is something that is seen in a child, the bones are not going to grow as efficiently, and so we see delayed growth patterns. You also see a lot of pain in weight-bearing bones because the bones are not as strong as they need to be. So pelvis, spine, any particular joint that is bearing weight, you're going to feel pain in those areas. Rickets is a specific disease associated with vitamin D deficiency. This is again not common in the US. It's mostly found in developing countries. It's a specific condition where we see softening and weakening of the bones, usually in children. So this is something that's caught at a very young age. It can be slowed, so if you get calcium in the diet and vitamin D in the diet, you can start to produce bone material, but usually there is permanent damage associated with it. And so it's going to cause skeletal deformities, like bowed legs are the classic example of rickets. So rather than having straight legs, they're going to bow outwards like this, as well as thickened and malformed joints. Another one you may have heard of is seasonal affective disorder. So this is something that is not a year-round disorder. It's usually a seasonal depression that people experience in the winter months when you are less likely to be outside, you're getting less sun because it's cloudy or it's snowy, whatever the season or whatever your particular climate is doing to you, but you're getting less of that vitamin D because your sun exposure is minimized. And it has been linked to depression episodes in some individuals. Vitamin E, this is another antioxidant. So again, it's going to minimize the oxidation of your biomolecules. So it's protecting them from decay. Commonly found in both plant and animal fats. Again, because of that, not a common deficiency. Most people can get what they need no matter what their diet is. The last vitamin I want to go over is vitamin K. I talked about vitamin K very briefly when I talked about digestion chemistry. So this one is required for blood clotting factors. So in order to clot your wounds, you need vitamin K. It can be found in green vegetables and that liver again, but it is also produced by your gut bacteria. So we can produce this as long as you have your own healthy gut flora. So because of that, not a common deficiency. All right, that was the whirlwind tour of vitamins. Like I said, make sure to focus on their names, their numbers, sources for them, their solubility patterns, that sort of thing. All right, inorganic nutrients, minerals are defined as inorganic nutrients that are necessary for normal metabolic functions. Now, I want to point out that this is the biological definition of a mineral. There is some confusion here. As I've told you before, I am a trained geologist, so the definition of a mineral that I learned is a geologic definition, which is a naturally occurring inorganic crystalline solid. They're not the same thing, so not that one, although those are much prettier. So inorganic nutrient, these are also necessary, so they are going to be required as part of your diet in order to do normal body functions. So there is a long list of minerals. I am not going to go through all of them. These are the ones I want you to know. So I have bolded them for you. And again, I am going to go through them individually so that you know what I want you to know about them. But just be aware that there are a lot of minerals that you consume through your diet. Also notice that minerals are typically not a full molecule like the vitamins are. Minerals are actually just elements, so they're ions that you're consuming. Calcium, potassium, and sodium I group together because they are all doing the same thing. They are all used for maintaining membrane potential. Another throwback to ANP1. Membrane potential is that moving of ions through the membrane to create an imbalance, a specific and, blanking on the word right now, deliberate imbalance in electricity in your ions in order to generate that flip, in order to create that action potential, to contract your muscles, to send nerve signals. All three of these ions are required to create that electrical imbalance. Calcium also has an additional role. It is a necessary component in bone mineral. We know that now. The bone mineral, the true name is hydroxyapatite. This is a molecular view of hydroxyapatite. So this is its structure. And you can see that there are a lot of calcium ions in its structure. So it is a necessary part to create the appropriate bone structure. I also like to point out that hydroxyapatite is also a geologic mineral. It is something that grows naturally in nature, looks like this. It has the exact same crystalline structure as your bone. It's just put together a little bit differently. Chlorine. This is going to be necessary for producing hydrochloric acid for your gastric juices. If you're in my lab yesterday, we went through this chemical equation, how we broke down carbonic acid to make hydrogen to send to the stomach. That hydrogen bonds with chlorine coming out of the bloodstream to form HCl, to form hydrochloric acid. Fluorine, this is going to be an ingredient in fluoride, which is going to be a catalyst for the production of tooth enamel. I talked about this pretty extensively in A&P 1, how your teeth have that outer coating, which is the purest form of bone. It is the strongest form of bone, and you only have so much tooth enamel. If it starts to decay, it has no nerve supply, it has no vasculature, so we have no way to repair it on our own. Instead, we have the ability to take in fluorine, which catalyzes a reaction to recrystallize new enamel. That's why it is commonly added to toothpaste, or in some communities it's actually added to the water supply, so you're getting in through the water you're drinking. You can also have fluoride treatments at your dentist. I did that a lot as a child. I lived rurally. I was on well water, which had no fluoride treatment, so I had to do the big mouth thing full of grape-flavored fluoride. It was awful. But it allows for the regrowth of enamel to preserve your teeth longer throughout your lifetime. Otherwise, it will decay and it cannot be replaced naturally. Iron. This is a key ingredient in hemoglobin. Remember, hemoglobin is that molecule that transports oxygen and carbon dioxide in our bloodstream. Specifically part of that heme group, which is dotted throughout the hemoglobin. Interestingly, I went to donate blood last week, and I went on Thursday. My hemoglobin was too low. I didn't have enough iron at the moment for donating. It's only a day deferral, so that night I made sure to eat a lot of very iron-rich foods. The next day, my hemoglobin count was up, and I could donate blood. So you just have to make sure you're balancing this in your diet. Nitrogen, key ingredient in the nucleotides for nucleic acids. So the nucleotides, remember, are that A, C, D, or not D, my goodness, A, C, T, and G. And those are going to be put together to create the nucleic acids, which are then used to make your amino acids, which are then used to make your proteins. So very, very important. Another side note, you may be aware that nitrogen is a major component of the atmospheric air that we breathe. So you're breathing in nitrogen all the time. Your body cannot absorb it. So the only nitrogen you can get is through your diet. So you have to actually consume nitrogen in order to supply it to your body. Breathing it in, not going to work. Phosphorus. Phosphorus is used to create phosphate, which is a building block for a lot of different things used by your body. So biominerals, nucleic acids, and again ATP, that energy piece that we need, all of those use phosphates as kind of part of their skeleton, part of their building pieces. So we need to make sure we have enough phosphorus in our diet to maintain the building blocks for all these necessary parts. And then water. You don't really think about water as a mineral, but it is. It's an inorganic nutrient that we require for our bodily functions. It is not needed for metabolism. Your production of your actual process of breaking down things produces water as a byproduct, but you do need water for almost everything else. Your cells are full of water. They're surrounded by water. You have water in your blood, water in your urine, your sweat, your tears. You need water to function properly. So, list of things that you need water for. Again, the cell, blood plasma, sweat, saliva, urine, as well as mobilizing food in the gut tube. you need to have a certain fluid component in order to keep it moving, and then we reabsorb that water through the large intestine. Now, the last thing I'm going to throw in here, you don't need to know. This is just another one of those opportunity for fun facts. So plants, which are obviously not humans, also need nutrients, and weirdly, the same nutrients that we do. So they're going to be making their own sugars from water, necessary mineral, CO2, and light. They're doing the exact opposite of aerobic respiration, which we'll get to next week. But they need those same minerals in order to do that particular chemical reaction. So especially phosphorus and nitrogen in plants, which is why if you are a gardener, you often add or supplement phosphorus and nitrogen into your fertilizers to help your plants grow and produce fruits or whatever it is they're trying to do. So very common in fertilizers. And just as a side note, if plants are growing in a region that is extremely nutrient poor, so they're not getting the minerals and vitamins that they need from the soil, they have evolved other ways to get them. And that's where you get carnivorous plants. So if you've ever seen the Venus flytrap is the classic example, that's the one here on the left. These are plants that will grab insects when they land on them, and they can actually digest those insects and get the phosphorus and nitrogens that they need that were being used by the fly. So, fun facts for you. Key topics: what are vitamins and minerals? So what are their definitions? Make sure you know the names, the uses, solubilities, and sources for each vitamin. Specifically, I want you to focus on these 3 deficiencies because they are associated with specific disorders or diseases. And then the uses of those important minerals that I singled out from the list of minerals totals. All right, that's all I have for you. I see you on Friday.